All right, hi everyone. So we have an exciting panel today to talk about how AI and automation can advance the use, be used to help enhance the compliance function. So we've got a diverse panel here with us today. So I'll let each of you introduce yourself.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start at the end here. My name is Vall, Herard, and I'm with Fidelity Investments, more specifically with Fidelity Labs, which is the innovation and incubator lab for Fidelity Investments, and also the co-founder and CEO of Saifr.ai.
I'm Harry Mandel. I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. I'm in the technology area, and I'm responsible for artificial intelligence applications and data architecture.
Hi, everyone. I'm Satish Kumar Challa. I head the digital transformation at SocGen. My primary areas of focus are compliance and risk.
Hi, guys. Asif Alam, CEO, Compliance.ai. Prior to Compliance.ai, I was with Thomson Reuters for about good 18 years or so. And my focus throughout my career has been with NLP, AI, building products, and doing those things. Really looking forward.
Great, thank you. I'm excited for this panel. So just before we begin, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the Brella app. All right, so first question. So which areas of compliance offer the greatest opportunities for innovation?
I can probably lead us off. I think that when you think about AI, certainly any area that's producing vast amounts of data is ripe for the application of AI, if you will. So when we think about the compliance space, everything from email communication surveillance, for example, where in some instances you have firms that are generating upwards of 10 to 15 million messages across all communication channel. That's ripe for AI innovation. The area of communication with the public, if you're in the registered investment advisor space, so that's everything from email marketing communications to even a speech that an executive at a company is giving at a conference that needs to go through a compliance process. And so the ability for you to potentially use AI to see, is what that person going to be saying on stage in that speech, is that going to fall afoul of some regulatory rule? For example, if we think about FINRA Rule 2210, around communicating with the public, that's one area where I think AI can have a tremendous impact. And obviously, the area of fraud and elder abuse, those are additional areas where I think the application of AI, where internally we've built AI capabilities in that space, where I think that AI can really help reduce a lot of the friction that you have in those compliance functions.
I can add to that. I seriously think that as we are evolving and as we're sitting in 2023, the complexity and the velocity that we see with the regulation, the types of different regulations that are coming in, and the requirement as we move from the age of information to the age of knowledge, where you really need to take the data and you have to convert it into different areas based on your business. Maybe you're focused on asset management versus wealth management versus how do you use that data. Technology is a must-have, in my opinion. So if you really look backwards, where do you need it? It's frankly all the area of compliance. But how do you take all this information, ingest it, state, federal regulators, all, and then you can reduce the noise to make sure that what you want is what you're seeing. Using technology, how you do that. That's part one. So it's really the compliance officers, the chief risk officers. How do you actually take that, and then how do you then pass it on to different groups? Part one. The second thing that I'm seeing a lot is really evolution of, in the RegTech world, of just not the reg change management, but what I call the compliance orchestration of taking in your policies, your procedures, and making sure that they are up to speed also. So maybe even in HR, your policy number 2181, just making it up, is it compliant to a certain federal regulator or state regulator or provincial if it's global? So it's really, the compliance is really becoming sort of in a very interesting way the quarterback in that sense of from a compliance, and how are you passing information, the right information?
Completely agree. I mean, I think it's definitely possible to use AI and technology innovation for every risk taxonomy or compliance risk taxonomy. While it is evident, I would like to take one specific journey within the compliance risk stripe and showcase what could be the potential which you all might have already experienced. One is in the space of financial crime compliance. If you take more in detail, you could start right from the segmentation itself, where AI could have a great value add in terms of dynamic segmentation, which is not typically possible where you have a segmentation model. Now you could have multiple segmentation models based off market volatility, the transactional activity, and so on and so forth, right? And you could fast forward that into derivation of country codes. Of course, it could be a stale conversation once we pass 2025 and the ISO changes are in place. But still, when you are not able to derive all of your country codes for a given address, I think that is one area where you could use AI potentially. Fast forward more into the journey, you go into the scenario design aspect. There are various ways of tapping the unstructured data in the payment activity and have more agile scenarios, right? And then you go further into the journey of generation of the scenarios or alerts. In the investigations, you could do a lot of things, like in terms of automating the whole decision process, working on behalf of the analyst's investigation process, closing the false positives, and take this further even more to stretch it, tie it to all other compliance risk stripes in terms of your compliance risk assessments, or to the RegWatch program, to the policies and procedures. Also go further from compliance into risk, where you could even see something operational, or from a liquidity perspective, or liquidity risk, or pricing risk perspective. You could do a lot of things. So I could go on and on, but.
Yeah, I'd like to, before I answer, I have to get a bit of my own compliance out of the way. At the Federal Reserve, we're required to say that everything is our personal opinion and doesn't reflect the beliefs or practices of the Federal Reserve. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I agree with everything everyone has said, but there's another area where I think AI can help that people are really not talking about yet, but has potential. Let me give you an example. In the area of anti-money laundering, whenever we say AML, we always say BSA AML. And you might say, what does the BSA stand for? It stands for Bank Secrecy Act. So if you're a bank and you suspect one of your customers is money laundering or doing some other type of financial crime, you can't go over to your other banks and say, you know, we're suspecting this fellow. Do you see anything that he's doing that looks suspicious? So I was at a conference in 2019 at the Financial Conduct Authority in England, where they were speaking about this, the FCA, I think I got the acronym right. And they had a huge conference about how to fight money laundering in this area, talking about different ways of encoding the names to maintain the secrecy, and also different types of multi-part computing and all these other things. But AI gives us another opportunity. You're not violating anyone's privacy if you give their name to a language model, if a person doesn't look at it and can't look at it, and you have the right compliance in place. So it'd be very possible to have an AI anti-money laundering system which would put the names together, and then if things reached over a certain threshold, could start giving out information to look at this and look at that back to the individual banks without anyone passing the name between the banks. So I think that's just, you know, just thinking a little bit out of the box, another way that we can use artificial intelligence. Another area is looking for bad behavior. I don't know if people here remember the whole LIBOR scandal, which is why we don't have LIBOR anymore. And there were people conspiring in different banks to fix it through emails, through other things. And as people mentioned before, email, you know, can certainly be put through compliance engines, but it's more typically looking for different types of things than actual behavioral things. But you could also train a model to recognize nefarious behavior, collusion, and things like that through the email systems, which again would be a violation of privacy if people were doing this, but not so much if it was a machine.
So I don't think anyone can argue that AI is valuable and needed, but can you guys share how financial institutions can effectively integrate it into their existing systems and workflows and really overcome the implementation challenges?
I can probably address that a little bit and maybe go back to the BSA example that was provided earlier by Harry. It's very interesting because we've done some work, and some of this was research that was actually done at DARPA. Essentially, they were interested in looking at, if I provide the name of a person, could I then from that build out a network to understand, is this person involved in terrorist financing? What is kind of like the behavioral model that you can put around that? And then as you might imagine, not only can you apply that kind of technology in a BSA function, but also client onboarding, right? In other words, if I provide you just the name of a person, doesn't matter where they reside around the world, can I then build a profile of the sort of network that that person is associated with? So it's a combination of behavioral models, a lot of AI, and so I'd be very interested to have that conversation with you a little bit after this. And so far as the implementation of something like that is concerned, I think that first and foremost, I used to be a equity and equity derivatives trader working in risk management, essentially. And I always start with the data, right? In other words, whenever you build a model, and I was doing quantitative trading at the time, whenever you build a model, the first thing that you need to start looking at is the assumption. Where is the data? How accurate is the data? What are some of the assumptions that go into the model? Unless you are working with a vendor that can answer those questions, or if you're an institution who's implementing it, unless you have policies and procedures around looking at the data, given the complexity that's involved with these models, you're going to get garbage on the other end. So I would say that first and foremost, data quality from an implementation standpoint. And then secondarily, it's really looking at, okay, what is the use case? Can I define the use case in very simple terms? And then follow on from that, do I have the data to validate the things that are coming out of that model? So I think those are the things that I look for first and foremost to say, okay, this is an area where we can apply AI to actually solve a particular problem.
I just want to build on what Val said, and I agree, Val, what you're saying in there. The element of data, and again, as I said, the complexity and velocity as it increases by fourfolds, how can we make use of technology to use it? So AI is great in, again, reducing the noise, but how can you use AI to make the data better? So for example, what we do is we have this patented technology where we call expert in the loop. And what we do is that we have lawyers actually looking at the data to make sure that data that you're getting, what we are ingesting, letting ML and NLP know that, hey, this is good, this is bad, this is, so really learning from the behavior, so the data, the next set of data that you're getting, it's getting better over time. So AI can actually help us digest, more data in very different ways. And I always say that again, my background is really data, is that, we used to live in a world where the customers used to buy specific data for specific task. Now that time has gone away where you just buy data and you can squeeze it this way to get something and you can squeeze it another way to get something else. That's where AI come into place. And again, from a regulatory perspective, there are so many use cases. So once you have the taxonomy, the Lego set, I say, the fundamentals of that, you can really very easily then put different Lego pieces on top of it to use the same data for different elements using AI.
One of the things that you have to do, at least if you're dealing with classified data, which we do, is to change your security model and align it with AI or even any type of modeling, because the classic security model that we use, and I'm sure is used at a lot of other firms, was going back to the time when we had rules-based models. So someone would define a business process, identify fraud as being a set of rules, like a transaction during non-business hours from a bank that normally doesn't, or something larger than an amount that's typically seen. So then you can give this to your programmers, and they can create the system without having access to the data. You can just give them a sample to test with. Well, this model doesn't work anymore. You can't create models, you can't create AI unless you make the data available to the people doing it. So you have to change the way of thinking about it, where, you know, they usually, in a production environment, not to get too technical, have something they call dev, where they write the first program, something they call test, where they test it, something called QA, where they make sure it works right, then they put it in production. And with the old security model, the real production data isn't available until that last model. So how do your data scientists train models? How do the AI people test it, demonstrate it, and so on? So that model has to change, and there's a lot of resistance in changing this because people are afraid of all the risks involved if your data gets out. So you need a very comprehensive data security model. You need to have a data catalog. You need to have a permission system which works, which is based on identity, which is, you know, at least two-factor, if not more. And you really have to go through your whole process so you can guarantee to the Board of Governors, in our case, that that bank data isn't going to find itself on Reddit. And, you know, so this has to happen. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face, is to make sure the right data is going to the right places and can't get out. That may also involve some newer techniques which allow for encryption of the data and still being able to train models with the data encrypted. Sort of the gold star of this is called homomorphic encryption, where you can take data and make it completely encrypted and still be able to train models with it. But it's slow, it's getting faster, but people are working on it. But there are hybrid solutions which come close to that, which work at speed. And people have to be thinking about that when designing security. And lastly, I don't want to say much about quantum computing, except we've all heard of it, and we know that it can be a security threat in the future. And it's time for people to use encryption standards, which we believe will be harder to crack by quantum computing.
So one thing I would like to highlight is when you're trying to compare your workflows, existing workflows, and then the AI models, two different processes. I would say, two different distinct entities. From a life cycle perspective, I think an organization, if it has to be integrated effectively within the existing ecosystem, the software development lifecycle is a more mature process. The model development lifecycle is not standardized yet. I think that's where we have to really define that standards in terms of these development lifecycles. Also see the AI models which are being trained currently in a siloed way, where you input the data and you get some output. What are the entry points and exit points where this can be integrated effectively with least friction within these workflows and processes of the organization, so that it can be really creating great value, right? And that's the main thing which is a challenge. That may be out of the AI perimeter, it would fall under process mining, so on and so forth, to really get there. But of course, it goes to the fundamentals. Once you get that clarity, I think going to everyone on the panel stating about the use case identification, data feasibility, all of them really fall into place, yeah?
Yeah, so what about the inherent risks in AI systems? How can we ensure financial institutions, fully grasp what those are?
I can start. I think one thing which is very important is humans being the co-pilot in that whole process. Yes, it has matured. I have built products since 2008 on AI, and I think one thing that has remained consistent is that, people think that humans will be completely eliminated. That is not, if you're building a product in that fashion, it will just not work. So how do you keep humans involved to make sure to ensure to oversee what you are building? I think that is, to me, is the most critical part of building a successful product, solution, anything you do with AI. And then over time, how, there are different levels of it. That the data that you're ingesting, are you overseeing it? And at some point, it becomes automated. How is that, how the data is being used, consumed? Is there an oversight, and what are you doing about it to fix it? So there is an element of human, and we should not discount that. And what I have seen is that what really AI does is that it really makes you efficient in that sense. So you can do more of what you were doing before. Your ROI obviously is significantly lower, but then also one of the biggest benefits I see is the repeatability, meaning, it could be anything that you don't have to repeat it. You can always go back and do that. AI is great at that. Mm-hmm. So again, we have to look at what are the things that AI is good at now, and obviously it's evolving, it's getting better and better. But then really complement it properly with humans to bring the best out of AI.
What I would say on the subject is that we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel in the following sense. I remember when I was on a trading desk, someone would come and show me a value at risk number. And I would ask, okay, how was that calculated? Was it a historical simulation, parametric Vall? Was it Monte Carlo simulation? If so, how was the Monte Carlo simulation seeded, right? Was it a twisted Monte Carlo simulation methodology you used to try and understand it? So I think the same thing applies here as well. At the end of the day, these are models, right? And we need to understand the limitations that these models have. And so if you look at even the most kind of like thing that's talked about a lot with respect to Chat GPT right now, when you look at how that's constructed, there are some severe limitations. That means that there are some underlying risks. First and foremost, these are autoregressive models, meaning that they rely on data from the past, meaning that unless they've seen something before, they can't understand that pattern. And secondarily, they have a fixed computational step, which means that they cannot plan. So in a lot of ways, a lot of these advanced models are really not that smart. And as people hear me talk about this, and that there really isn't anything intelligent in these models that's happening. At the end of the day, even something as advanced as ChatGPT, for example, it's really understanding the distributional structure of the dictionary over a large set of language samples that it's seen. So consequently, it's going to make things up, right? And so if you are relying on a model that's built as on that core foundation, you have to understand what are the limits and where do you interject human judgment, really. And going back to my trading days again, you don't just accept a Vall number without understanding, okay, how was this constructed? What were the assumptions? What's coming out of it? Does it make sense with reality and human judgment?
I'd like to pick up where Vall just left off. He looked at that VAR number. One of the fears that I have about AI systems is that they'll become more and more end-to-end, and there won't be a Vall there to challenge the VAR number, that VAR number will just be an intermediary step in a full computation, and it could be calculated incorrectly, and Vall would have picked it up, and now no one's looking at it. It's just another machine picking it. So we have to be careful to make sure we monitor things. And even though there's a temptation to develop end-to-end models, that sometimes we may just have to have an output, have a human there to look at it, and then put it back in as a safe check, depending on the importance of the model. The second risk, which I worry about, is, and say loans are a good example. If you have different loan officers deciding to give people a loan, they could all have their own biases and their own ways of thinking and what they look for. But a person has an opportunity, if they're turned down by one, to go to another bank and apply again and have someone else look at it, or employment. As AI becomes more ubiquitous, the models may get standardized, and then there won't be an alternative. So someone could really be hurt because they don't fall under the criteria of the model, and there's little recourse. So I think we have to be careful to have even diversity in models, even though that sounds funny in a sense. I'm not being funny. I think that you need to have different models being used for the same purpose in different places, trained different ways. I mean, there is a sort of data science precedent for this. We have what's called random forests, which are a bunch of decision trees, each one seeded a little differently, each one given a little different information, which make a decision by taking the majority or sometimes looking for outliers. But I think we just need independent paths, and we should have models checking each other as well. So when you have one process give a result, there should be something which was created completely independently that might be checked against it to agree, and we have to keep testing them to see if they're working properly. And this becomes difficult because in the numerical world, it's very easy to check models. In the natural language world, it's not so easy because all the test sets are for very specific tasks, and when you put them out in the wild, in the real world, those specific tests don't come up, and you can get bizarre behavior. And that's okay if you're at a conference and giving a paper, but it's not okay if someone's career or the ability to buy a house depends upon it. Or if you're making, if you're on the trading desk and you have some automatic trading system that's creating your portfolio automatically, and many desks are run that way now, and something goes wrong, you've got a problem. Or it could be something really simple. I won't mention the bank, but one of the things which we discovered at the Fed was there was a credit card, a bank that had a credit card that was approving the cards and didn't notice that one of the inputs being, has this person defaulted on a credit card before, just simply because of a type error in a database query, always said no. And they ran up a huge amount of losses over a short period of time because of this. So you gotta watch your data.
Yeah, sure. So I would like to summarize, but I would say at a high level, there are several risks, right? I mean, starting off with reputational risk, as big as reputational risk, when you try to implement some sophisticated models and you are not able to defend the decisions it is making, it is a big reputational risk out there. You would want to also try to guard yourself from intellectual property rights because you're not able to identify the traceability of this data from where it actually originated. And if you're deploying any large language models, data privacy is a big risk out there, right? And then if you go into the continuous monitoring aspect, which was discussed by Harry earlier, I would want to go a little more deeper there in terms of the continuous monitoring has to be on three main fronts, according to me, from a business standpoint, where you are trying to also see the cost factor of it. I mean, yes, AI is awesome, but is it really giving the value? I think to Vall's point, in terms of value at risk. So you need to have that context while you're having the technical context, which is a fundamental basic 101 in terms of identifying the health and hygiene of the model. Is it really functioning in the right ecosystem? The third aspect is the functional aspect of the model. When I say the functional, why was the model in place? I mean, it is obviously trying to create some decision which is supporting the compliance side of things. Obviously, is there any materiality exposure in that regard? Is it effectively covering that gap or not? So that kind of monitoring has to happen in all these directions. And of course, explainability, biases, all of those constraints have to be documented, well documented on an iterative basis.
Yeah, so thank you. So we have like 2 minutes left. So just my last question quickly. I know, Val, you mentioned ChatGPT, so generative AI, everyone's favorite topic these days. So what extent do you see generative AI kind of revolutionize compliance tasks?
Well, I mean, I think I would go back to something that Saifr said earlier in terms of the velocity. So I was speaking with a fairly senior person at Microsoft recently, And one of the things that I mentioned is that, yes, you guys have made this $10 billion investment into OpenAI, but there is a risk where you guys can end up creating, making it companies less efficient, right? Because if you think about the velocity with which you can use generative AI to create documents, let's say, for example, let's say it's an investment management agreement, which they are very close. Microsoft is very close to being able to do that. Where, within their Copilot environment, you can ask it to create essentially an IMA for me with these following characteristics, and what you're going to get is essentially a 10, 12-page document that is essentially an IMA. Well, if you are creating these things much faster, and we know that from a demographic standpoint, that you know, hopefully I'm not offending anyone here, but the compliance workforce is not getting younger, because as I go around and speak with chief compliance officers, there aren't as many younger people coming into the field. Well, now you have more stuff that humans have to review, right? And so the velocity with which that Gen AI could potentially revolutionize things, but also makes it harder for companies to comply with existing regulation is real. So I think the way in which the industry tackles that, going back to Harry's point, yes, you can have AI essentially watching the AI, but you also need to have that human in the loop component, because the stuff that AI has the potential, Gen AI specifically has the potential to create things that sounds correct to the untrained ear, but that is in fact factually inaccurate. And so having that human in the loop component is you know, key to deployment of these technologies.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to make is, I get asked the question, which makes me laugh, but then I sort of worry. Will Gen AI be all AI? And my answer to that is certainly not. Generative AI is good for generating things. It's good for creating content. It's good for question and answering. It's not good for prediction. So you would not want to go to Gen AI and feed in the price of Apple for the past year and ask it to make an investment decision for you. And you wouldn't want it to look at the sales coming into your company and asking it what to do in terms of production. The techniques that have been developed in machine learning work far better for prediction and classification. And people forget about that. And before we close down the data science departments, we better think twice.
No, definitely. I mean, I think to build on to Harry's point, I would say, I think it is best used to improve productivity where all you can identify some low-hanging use cases. When I say low-hanging use cases, in terms of generating the content as a first draft, especially in the legal world or the policy world, and then, of course, trying that as a base version to expedite to, you know, to a next higher version of it. That would be a great use case from generative AI standpoint. The second place where I also see is where all we have data constraints in general, like in case of some suspicious activity, there's not a lot of alerts which get generated typically, but that doesn't mean it's not happening, because you're not able to tab based off your traditional rules. You're not able to really get there. So maybe generative AI can be helpful in terms of simulating that data. And again, it will need SMEs to really validate that generated data to get there in terms of using that. A great use case, again, in terms of using it for questioning and answering, but then again, you can really take it a little further in terms of trying it to train on policies, procedures, or on the advisory front to make it as a first-level assistant, I would say, rather than really taking it to the finalized version of it. It can't get there yet.
I just want to add here that don't take Gen AI lightly. I go back to 2008 or maybe 2007, when I know that when I used to visit my customers' banks at that time on the trading floor, cloud was a bad word. 2008 happened, we all know what happened in 2008. And right after that, cloud became a must-have, not a nice-to-have. Fast forward 2023, where AI is and where Gen AI is, yes, I totally agree. And we as a company also, where we are based on AI, expert in the loop or human in the, it's essential. But what my view is that please do not just leave it alone, because Gen AI will evolve very quickly. Yes, it may not be there now, but with business conditions and things as they change and as people start using AI overall more, Gen AI will become a very integral part of what it is. I'm not saying it tomorrow, but maybe in a few years. So be on it, and just don't feel off guard what happened in 2008 where technology or cloud became a must-have.
So I'm going to switch to some questions that came in. So someone asked, are there too many risks with advanced AI, such as bias, that make it too early for compliance processes to heavily adopt them?
I don't think there are too many. I mean, there are too many to do it tomorrow. We should be working on this now, but I don't think we should be afraid of doing it. I think that you have to have teams testing it for all the things that can go wrong before you put it out, I like to say, in the wild.
Yeah, completely agree. I think understanding your data, if you are confident about your data and use case, the risks would be mitigated, I would definitely say. I agree.
So how close are we to fully automated compliance workflows with humans only required to review the more complex tasks?
I think we're far away from that. I think that it's going to be a great accelerator. So, for example, a lot of the compliance has to do with reviewing documents and data. And clearly, AI can be used with semantic search and with also understanding the regulations, which Vall can talk about more. You can't beat it. We at the Federal Reserve reduce things that take months to weeks by using AI.
Sorry. Just very quickly, I think that we are, yes, we are not, at the end, but we are somewhere in the middle. Because again, I go back to the way I started about complexity and velocity, and what I'm seeing is just not in the United States, but overall, people are overwhelmed with the information they are getting. And the only way to resolve that is by using AI. And again, having the oversight, expert in the loop, how do you do that? How do you manage that? Using technology. The old way of getting these regulation and just sitting on it and having the outside counsel to look at it, that how does it impact me, does not work. Because the other element that is happening is that regulators are becoming proactive. They are not reactive, right? So they are not just, there are elements, there are things where people are being fined not just because they have done something wrong, but they are being fined because they haven't done enough on compliance. So I think it's important, in my opinion, using technology, AI, it's becoming more and more common. And again, people are using it cautiously, whatever their comfort level is, but definitely I would say it's in the middle too.
What I would say is 2 quick points on that. First and foremost is that it's here.
Yeah.
You don't have a choice. I mean, put in the proper context, OpenAI and ChatGPT, yes, it's a nice feat of engineering, but at the end of the day, what it is, it's really a jump in user experience, right? A lot of the underlying technology, some of it's been around since the 1980s. Here's a sentence, I mask a couple of words in a probabilistic way, can you guess what the words should be? Essentially, that's what ChatGPT is doing, right? That's been around for a while. What they've done is scale it from an engineering standpoint so that they make the user experience easier, which means that you don't need to know anything about AI to start using it. So therefore, it's here, just like with every other piece of technology, it's here to stay, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And then secondarily, I think that the use of AI can help address something that regulators have been concerned forever and ever, even back in my days looking at Basel I, Basel II, which is how do you embed a risk culture inside of an organization? Now imagine, for example, if you're using Word you're using PowerPoint, you're using whatever tool that you're using, that you had essentially an agent that if there is something that is potentially non-compliant or something that is potentially risky, you can get an alert, right? Now, you are training the entire organization to be more risk aware, right? That doesn't mean that you get rid of your compliance department. I don't think, I think we're a very long way away from having AI that will replace humans. But I think those two elements alone, I think makes it worthwhile to put the time and investment into seeing what are the use cases within your organization where something like that can fit in, because it's here and it's not going anywhere.
I have a slight different opinion. I mean, while I agree with the complete sentiment about autopilot on AI, I see there is already several use cases where autopilot is in place, but then it is not high risk in general. When I say high risk, basically the exposure of materiality is very low, and you have great quality historical information and label data. And obviously the models are very simple models with which you could achieve. So then, yes, you could do that end to end. It may not have significant ramifications, which we could really socialize out here in the panel, but that's where I try slightly differ.
Can I just add one more point?
Yeah.
In there that, again, if we look at AI in general or Gen AI, there are two elements that we need to be very careful in looking at it, which is input and output. When it comes to input, I think we are much further down of what you can ask, to AI or Gen AI of what, show me the banks that are fine like me, that's fine. But the output, the data set at the back absolutely needs human intervention or expert in the loop where the data that is being outputted, is it giving the right answer to you? So I think there is an element of input and output within the AI world, and we are much further down in the input of what you can ask. It doesn't mean that, output. So it's work in progress.
Definitely. So we have time for one more question. I'll open it to anyone in the room if anyone has a question. Sure.
Will we always need humans to oversee all of this? How many jobs are we going to lose in the economy?
I think you will, because when you think about even the most simple task, so for example, you think about self-driving cars. We've been talking about that forever, but yet we're not there yet, because there's an element of human judgment that's required, right? So for example, if you're a 16-year-old person, you've been trained to drive for like 10, 15 hours, you're driving down the road and you see a ball come running across the street. Immediately, there's a judgment that you make. You think that, hey, there's probably going to be a small kid running across. I should probably slow down. We don't have AI systems that can make that decision unless a human specifically programmed that aspect into it yet, right? In other words, to kind of like see that and react and make judgment. Another simple example, if you look at a cat, for example, that's about to jump on a table, you'll observe that it's sitting there, it's looking before it actually, right, jumps. It's planning. Even at that most basic level, we're not there yet on AI, right? And so consequently, will there be a time when we have, what some people have termed general intelligence, artificial intelligence, what I would call really human intelligence? Yes. I mean, I think that in the span of time, we always move forward from a technology standpoint, so there will come a time, but I think we're very, very far, given the fact that, again, I go back to what I said earlier, all of the underlying architectures right now, they're really autoregressive models with fixed computational steps, which means that they're not capable of judgment. And so that human element, I think we're very, very far from being able to say, hey, we're going to just turn it over to the machines. So it's an opinion that I have. I just want to be sure, to state that. But I think that's where we are.
I agree with what Vall said. And to take it a little bit further, if sometime in the future we get to the point where we achieve general artificial intelligence and they are capable of autonomous thought, I think we really need to keep our eyes on them more than ever, because we have to make sure that our interests are aligned with their interests.
I would say that we always think about the human jobs are being lost. Again, I go back to 2008 cloud. that, oh, the data centers are going away, jobs are going away. Well, it's not going away. People are being retrained to do different things. And I think with AI, where it is, same thing is happening, that the repeated process, yes, those things, people will be retrained to do something else.
I mean, prompt engineering wasn't a job title
Yeah.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
Now you go on Google, there are people who are looking for someone who's a prompt engineer,
Yeah.
right? That's a job that didn't exist 3 years ago.
But jobs will be lost.
Yeah.
How many telephone operators are there today? There are these buildings in New York, these big, tall, windowless buildings that they've repurposed that used to just be computers, and before that, mechanical relays for completing phone calls. We don't have that anymore. It's like we don't have as many farmers as we used to have. So things will change, and I think the next thing that people need to worry about is what I would call sort of white-collar manual labor, where they're already being replaced by things that are simpler than AI, like robotic process automation and things like that, where you can take these repetitive things, like some things in one computer system, you have to read it, transcribe it into another computer system. A lot of people do that. It's a pretty dreary job, but if your livelihood depends on it, you don't want to lose it. So I think anyone doing this type of work should see the writing on the wall and start learning to do something else.
I completely agree. I think it's the rate at which the adoption happens in this technology once it becomes more stable and mature. And I think to answer straightforward in terms of when would AI replace humans, I would say that's the point of singularity where we hope to be. And that is when the models are conscious that they are existing, just like human beings. So we are far, far away from that. That is when we actually would have conquered learning, by the way. So it is literally like the digital matrix you would be in. You could really embed any kind of learning into any other form and just download it.
There are also jobs that people don't want to have. Insurance companies are actually the first adopters of generative AI at scale. I was surprised to see this. I went to a few conferences and they were talking about what they've done already. There are a lot of people that do not want to start in the field of being a claims adjuster or of doing that paperwork processing. And there are experts that have been in these companies for decades that are really good at it. And when they go, I don't think there's going to be anyone to replace them. So we also need to think about that.
All right, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
I'm sure the
Thank you.
audience has a lot more questions I now want to ask you as we go back to networking. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.